You've joined the Betamax Video Club, rewinding back to our favourite films of the 1980s. My name's Rich Nelson, and tonight I've rented The Karate Kid. Watching it with me is Mark Godfrey from The Football Pink. Hello Mark, how are you?
I'm okay, Rich. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. The Karate Kid, the original. You came to me suggesting you wanted to cover this film. How was it this time?
It's a film that I probably watched when I was younger at least 2 or 3 times a week, I would have thought, along with other classics of its era like Top Gun and Beverly Hills Cop. But it's something that I hadn't watched for 2 or 3 years, even though it is my favourite film of all time. So in preparation for this podcast, I thought I'd watch it all over again, and it still hasn't lost any of its appeal for me. Whenever I listen to Cruel Summer by Bananarama, I listen to the lyrics, and the lyrics talking about it's hot on the streets and the pavements are burning and all this. And whenever I hear that bass line in that, I always feel you get that sense of like overbearing heat from that song. And then when you see it in the movie, it pops up at a moment where it's quite a key point in the film where he sort of not first starts to flirt with the girl in it, played by Elizabeth Shue, called Ali, but it's when their connection first starts to piss other people off, which is her ex-boyfriend, the high school jock Johnny, who also then happens to turn out to be Daniel LaRusso's arch nemesis in the whole film throughout, and the karate Moriarty, if you like, to Daniel LaRusso's Sherlock in a way. But also you've got the famous "You're the Best Around" song, which still, it gets people very, very dewy-eyed, I think, in the nostalgia stakes whenever they hear that song. And I don't think I know anybody, certainly not at my age, who doesn't try to pull off the crane technique stance whenever they hear that song. But a lot of the other things in the soundtrack as well are quite memorable. But yeah, there's lots of things in that film that when you watch it, okay, they do look a little bit dated perhaps, but I think the ostensibly the film is quite timeless in it. It's good versus bad, and a lot of there's a lot of things in there that I think people can take away from it, other than it was a great film when you were 9 years old.
Yeah, I say, this was the first time I'd watched the film from start to finish in maybe sort of 15, 20 years. And you sort of forget how good it was at what it did. I mean, I didn't realise how long it was. It clocks in at over 2 hours, which for a film like this, you don't really expect. But I mean, the story starts with Daniel, who moves to California from New Jersey with his mother, she gets herself a job. And there's elements of it from other films where he's this new kid in town, he's the fish out of water, and he's very much what you'd imagine this New Jersey cliche is. He's a bit of a hard talker, a bit of swagger about him. It doesn't take long for that to quite literally get beaten out of him during the course of him starting at school and attempting to woo Ali. He gets beaten up about 4 times before he finally starts, the essence of learning karate, which, is quite a lot really. And I guess it shows, how much he's had to take. But some of the fight scenes in this, they're, well choreographed and everything, but you can kind of think this isn't just street brawling. This isn't just sort of 15, 16-year-old kids fighting. One of them, Johnny, he's very good karate fighter. And then Daniel, who's grown up in New Jersey and come out here and thinking he's going to get a new life, and all of a sudden he's got the high school jock doing karate kicks on him and all that.
Yeah, and where it's sort of, again, another thing personally that I find quite a connection is that when I was about that age, when the film came out, I used to move around a lot when I was younger, so I kind of felt the connection with Daniel having to move and make new friends and being the fish out of water and not that I ever got my head kicked in by anybody, but I could kind of relate to what some of the things that he would have gone through moving from one place where things were comfortable, and he knew the rules, so to speak, of how things went. And then all of a sudden he ends up in Los Angeles, and he's got no friends, he's got no family. His pushy mother is taking him away to this place that he's got no idea about. And then all of a sudden he sees a girl he likes, and then the high school jock comes along and beats his head in. Although, to be fair, Daniel Russo does actually ask for a little bit of a kicking a couple of times in the early stages of that film. Firstly, when he moves into his new apartment block, He meets a young guy called Freddie, and uh, he knocks him over when opening the gate to go into this apartment complex that he's going to live in, and he gets asked whether he knows karate. So mistakenly, he starts saying, "Yeah, he's quite handy," you know. So when he gets himself into a bit of
Yeah.
a ruck soon afterwards, and then gets shown up to be a bit of a wuss, he makes himself quite not unpopular, but he makes a bit of a tit of himself in front of the very few friends he has made in his early days in LA.
Yeah, and I mean this the first scene. He's his new friend has taken him down to the beach, and they're playing a bit of football. And from our sort of previous blogging writing background, sort of there is a nice little football link there. And Daniel shows some good skills. It doesn't take long before Johnny turns up on his motorbike with his little hangers on and everything. And because his ex girlfriend is Ali, and the green eyed monster kicks in, quite literally, because then he decides to join in. But it's Daniel showing off a little bit of the knight in shining armor when they Ali and Johnny are arguing over their radio, and he steps in, trying to be the chivalrous big man, and it's then that he starts getting put down and getting involved. But strangely, there is a theory, because Daniel gets, I wouldn't say a massive kicking. He mostly gets sort of tripped up a few times and a couple of punches. The theory, and it was sort of built on in How I Met Your Mother, because the actor who plays Johnny was a semi-recurring character in that, which is a sort of, I suppose, a later version of Friends, really, where he turns up and one of the characters, this guy is his idol. And the theory doing the rounds is that it was Daniel who was the aggressor, and that Johnny only ever used karate for self-defense. And on 4 occasions, Daniel has either instigated or done something to antagonize, and that Johnny, while aggressive perhaps in his attitude, has really only reacted to what's put in front of him rather than being the aggressor.
It's an interesting theory. I'll give you that as one I've never heard before, but I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. The first, as you say, the first time they meet is on the beach when, Daniel's having a game of football. Although you were saying about him having great skills and whatnot, and yeah, he's I think he does a few keepy ups or whatever. But if you actually watch them playing football on the beach, it looks like a bunch of 4-year-old kids playing, because there's a group of them and they're all collected within about a 5-yard radius of the ball, running up and down the beach. I mean, when was the last time you saw anybody play like that except in a primary school playground? So I think the representation of football at that point is not a particularly great one. But again, I suppose it was mid 80s United States. So football was kind of in a very strange place at that time there. It certainly wasn't the sport it is now. Um, and then, then I suppose you're right. He turns up and he's chivalrous and he's trying to protect Ali and make sure a ghetto blaster doesn't get kiboshed by Johnny and his pals on their motocross bikes. But I wouldn't say he was the aggressor. I think he's perhaps put himself in the way of somebody who just can't control his teenage toxic masculinity.
These are just kids, and despite the fact that Ralph Macchio was 22 when they were filming this, I suppose he looks very young, and it's probably quite easy for him to pull it off. But again, it's going back a lifetime really to when I was that age. It's funny, looking back at the interactions they have, and it is what you might imagine a typical American high school to be, with the jocks, and there's probably the nerds somewhere else, and everyone else sort of just trying to find their place to fit in. And it was after this episode, and then they have a little ruckus on the football pitch the day after, don't they? Where a rather nasty 2-footed tackle gets put in on Daniel, but he gets up and you can't put your hands up. It's you're asking for a red card, aren't you?
It is. You're right. It's he fell into the trap, and yeah, he's sent off back to the changing rooms by the coach. But again, it's all because of the girl. She's the one who's causing all the trouble.
Mm. Apparently, she was actually playing football in her private life to quite a high standard. So really, she should be teaching them a few lessons. It's she apparently gave it up to do gymnastics, which she's starts showing off as well. But men can't control themselves when an attractive woman's around, and we can say she's attractive because she's 20, and we're not getting it. We're not breaking any laws with this one.
Yes, I think that's exactly what I was saying. Like even now, I can't look at Elizabeth Shue in that and not think back to how I felt a little bit giddy at the time and how perfect she was. And you telling me that she was a very good footballer has just
Yeah.
gone up another notch in my estimation. And even looking back now, again, I did check her age, and yeah, as you said, she was about 20 when this was made. So although she had the knee socks and the cheerleader look, I think you're right. I think I don't feel so bad to say that 9-year-old me, 12-year-old me, 16-year-old me would have been putty in her hands just like Daniel was.
And maybe you'd have had to sign up for a karate tournament to win her honor as well.
Well, I can't be the only one who was inspired by this film to take up karate and thought, I know I'm going to be Daniel Russo or I'm going to be winning karate tournaments within, 2 hours, which is about the length of this film. And I can't have been the only one either who went to one karate lesson, realized that actually it's going to take more than that, and binned it off after that 1 hour of stretches and lunges.
Weirdly, I was about the same. I think I was about 8 or 9, and I went to a karate lesson. And when after virtually just an hour of dicking about and doing kicks and hayas, I got pitted against the person with the highest color belt, and he put me down with one kick, and I never went back. So perhaps there's a lesson in there somewhere.
Hmm.
It was after this the Yobs and the jocks, they ganged up on Daniel while he was on his bike. They force him off the hill. He's then putting the bike in the skip. But Mr. Miyagi, who we've met very briefly previously, he's the handyman of the apartment block that the LaRussos have moved into. He's a very sort of quiet Japanese gentleman who keeps his bonsai trees and everything. We slowly start meeting him and the interaction between him and Daniel, which basically forms the main crux of the film. We see him trying to catch a fly with chopsticks, but it was only after the fourth beating, which Daniel gets after he pours water over Johnny when he's in the toilet at the Halloween party, Mr. Miyagi decides to climb over the fence while 5 of the guys are setting on Daniel and basically takes them all quite easily, really, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. It's one of the classic scenes of the film, really. And Daniel's sort of semi-conscious, having been almost beaten to a pulp by the Cobra Kai guys. That's the name of the dojo that they all go and practice their karate in. And what's interesting, as you said, he wants to go to the school dance, but he wants to be Mr. Invisible when he goes there. So Mr. Miyagi, in a previous meetings, dug out a costume where he's inside a shower, so nobody knows that it's actually him in that fancy dress costume. And he sees Johnny in the toilets and gets him soaked with water with a hose pipe, and then he gets chased out of the school. And one of the strangest moments in the film actually happens then is all of the Cobra Kai lads in this sort of skin tight skeleton outfit. They all slip and fall on each other. But what's interesting is there's a noise of a pile of bones all being dropped on each other. Yeah, they're all wearing like a stretchy lycra suit. Where does that noise come from? I don't get it.
There's a random one
Yeah,
in there.
I think somebody's thought. I wonder if anyone's going to notice if I drop that sound of like bones clanking together in. Anyway, yeah. So then Mr. Miyagi piles over the thing, kicks one of them in the ghoulies, and batters them all and leaves them all gasping for air on the floor. And again, that's one of the many actually iconic scenes or from the film. I think it's been parodied in several things. I remember it being in Family Guy. I think was the last thing I saw it
Yeah.
in. So it's amazing how this isn't The Godfather or Shawshank Redemption. It's Karate Kid, but so many references do pop up in other things.
It's strange as well because it goes to show that sort of mystical thing where Mr. Miyagi vaults over the fence and takes 5 teenage karate students really easily. He doesn't do an awful lot as such, but obviously enough to incapacitate them, because it's the next day that he takes it upon himself to take Daniel to the dojo where the Cobra Kai will sort of operate, and the 5 of them are there in various states of injury with arms in slings and black eyes and things like that. And the sensei, who reminds me far too much of David Hasselhoff,
Mm.
and perhaps that was perhaps a missed opportunity for the casting. Essentially, he's this guy that you look at the pictures on the wall, and he was the army karate champion in the 70s, and he's bad news because he's got a cobra tattoo on his arm. But he, in Miyagi's way of getting them to stop beating up on Daniel, agrees to challenge the guys to at the local karate tournament, and pretty bold claim, really. It's you take in a guy who's never done karate before, say for they talked about doing some free classes back in New Jersey, and putting him in a tournament against whichever area, the Valley area of California. It's he's very proud of his own impending methods, I think.
He is, and it also kind of, if you think about it a little bit more in depth, you kind of wonder about Mr. Miyagi's own backstory from when he was younger. You do learn a bit later on about his life when he gets around the age of 20, I guess. But he grew up in Okinawa, which is an island off Japan, and he mentions throughout the film that karate's not for aggression. It's to save your life kind of thing. It's a self defense mechanism, and you wonder if perhaps Mr. Miyagi's got a backstory similar to Daniel's in a way, that maybe he was the wimpy kid because he's only a little fella, of course,
Hmm.
but maybe he was the kid who got picked on at school, and he was the kid who got bullied by the teenage jock of or whatever you would have had in 1930s Japan. Um, Similar kind of character, and he sees something of himself in Daniel, and therefore wants to teach him to be able to look after himself. Because there's no what other reason is there than because he's not family. He's only just met the kid 5 minutes ago when he's moved in, but he suddenly takes him on as his friend, and he's his teacher, he's his mentor, his guardian angel. All of these things, he almost becomes like a father figure as well, given that Daniel is he's only got one parent as well in his mother, who surprisingly sort of melts away from the story quite quickly after the beginning. She's this domineering figure who's in it quite a lot in the beginning, then she sort of vanishes quite quickly as Daniel's problems worsen throughout the film. So, maybe that's Miyagi's reasoning behind throwing Daniel in at the deep end, so to speak, or throwing him to the lions. I don't know.
Which, like you say, she's obviously happy for the local caretaker to take charge of her son and do everything else. It's there is that sort of relationship where there's obviously some reason this, unless Miyagi's done this 100 times previously, which he probably hasn't. But maybe this is crying out for a prequel. The Miyagi, the early days. I'm surprised that hasn't been done yet.
Well, I mean, Ralph Macchio, although I think he probably still looks very good for being in his 50s, I think he's past,
Mm.
even he, with his cherubic good looks, has passed the sell by date in playing himself again in a prequel. And Pat Morita, the guy who played Mr. Miyagi, he died about 10, 12 years ago. So you'd have to find different folks to go in it. But
Mm.
yeah, well, I mean, there was the appetite for the Will Smith, not Will Smith, the kid's name, whose name I've forgotten, Jackie Chan and his Will Smith's son, which was called The Karate Kid. And although I've never seen it, I'm pretty convinced, don't they do kung fu in that rather than karate,
Yeah, they do.
which annoyed me
Yeah,
slightly.
because they do kung fu. I think in that Will Smith Jr. or whatever his name is, him and the mother moved to China, and he gets picked on by local kids, and obviously has a girl there that he fancies. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it's kung fu.
Yeah.
I mean, the less said about that, the better. It was really awful.
Of all the cashing in done on old movies that there have been over the last 10 or 15 years, that one's possibly the most cynical, whereby it's not even karate. I mean, you've had Dukes of Hazzard and Starsky and Hutch and The Italian Job and so on and so on. That one hasn't even got the same blooming thing behind it. So,
It's similar, I guess, to the Burt Reynolds film Mean Machine
oh yeah,
that was about American football, and then they turned it. Well, they remade it here, didn't they, for soccer in a prison, and then I think Adam Sandler did a version as well, and they changed the name. It was The Longest
that's
Yard.
right. Yeah,
They were all sort of essentially the same film. So I suppose, not to put anything past these Hollywood executives, but I don't want to go putting ideas in their head either. But someone was telling me on Twitter today that there's a TV series in the works for the Karate Kid, but unlike other ones that we've seen, and I discussed this on the Lethal Weapon podcast we did, where a lot of the time they take the character names and the title of the film and run off in their own direction. Same with Teen Wolf. Apparently, this one actually has Ralph Macchio and the actor who plays Johnny at their current age, and there's I think the plot, I had a quick look on Wikipedia, is that Johnny sets up his own dojo in a kind of way for redemption, and Daniel, I don't think he kept up the karate much past Karate Kid. Was he in Karate Kid 3? Is that one with Hilary Swank? I can't remember.
Yes, that was.
Was it
No,
not
no,
then?
no. Karate Kid 3 was where the friend of Kreese, who was the sensei from Cobra Kai, his rather unhinged pal from Vietnam, the special forces or whatever, he comes to try and take revenge on Daniel, and then Kreese comes back into it as well. And I think that's, is that not a girl with ginger hair in that one? I think Hilary Swank might have been the fourth one, but by that time Ralph Macchio, I think he'd only done up to the third one. But yeah, I read about the same thing about there being a TV series, and Ralph Macchio was going to be in that one. So I was interested to know what they had in mind for the plot. And you said about Johnny, perhaps he sets up the dojo as a redemption. Right at the end of the film, not to give away the plot for anybody, three people on the planet who haven't seen it. Johnny kind of tries to redeem himself right at the end, where
Yeah, he does.
he's been beaten in the final, and then he's, you're a great guy, Daniel, and he hands the trophy over to him and everything else, and you kind of think, well, maybe he's seen the error of his ways and seen finally, opened his eyes and seen what a bad influence his teacher was on him, and maybe that's the overall moral to take from the whole film is not the Karate Kid side of the story, but the Johnny and Danny dynamic actually plays out because of how good your teacher is. So maybe that's the real moral you should take from the story rather than the obvious one.
Kreese is a very dominating character. He's got this hold on these young lads that he's the sensei, they do what he says. But, and again, jumping a little bit further ahead when we get to the tournament and some of the instructions that he starts giving to the kids, and the kids, while not rebelling against him, because God forbid, they really start thinking, wow, are we going too far with this? The talk is about, deliberately injuring him and so on. And the fact that he kind of, with this meeting with Mr. Miyagi, he's almost indicating that he's willing to fight him himself, which, again, it's kind of saying that if Daniel loses the tournament, then he's fair game for the bullies, but then so's Mr. Miyagi.
He's a nasty piece of work. I think that's about the best way to sum him up.
After that, we've got the start of the training, and this is the whole, and this is perhaps part of the point of the film where it has stuck in everyone's psyche and memory, and it does get ripped off a lot in popular culture, where Miyagi teaches Daniel karate, but it's not obvious from the start. It's certainly not obvious to Daniel. It becomes obvious later on, but your first day of training, he presents him with a bandana as a sort of symbol of the teacher and student relationship, and he says, as part of his methods, you don't question what I say, you don't answer back, you do what I tell you because this is how we do it. And his first day of training to be a karate pupil or master or whatever, it's washing Mr. Miyagi's quite impressive fleet of classic cars.
Yeah, you're right. It doesn't become apparent straight away that he's what he's teaching him is going to actually come in very handy. And they certainly didn't teach me that in my first lesson of my first and only karate lesson. But yeah, and I think it's that part of the film that's crucial actually, because you have to suspend disbelief for a bit that in the period of this movie, which we don't know for sure how long that period is in real life, from being an absolute novice to being the All Valley champion.
I think they kind of hinted it was 2 months.
Yeah, which is, I mean, come on, that's it's ridiculous, right? These young lads have probably been doing it since they were 6 years old. So if we completely forget all that for a second, I think if they skipped over that in the film, it would make it even more unbelievable, and I think it would lose something, not just from the iconic scenes.
Wax on, wax off.
Everybody knows that. You can say that probably to anybody in not just the English speaking world, but other parts of the world, and they'll know what you're talking about. And they don't have to be 40 years old plus. which I am, and I was 9 years old or whatever when that film came out, then they would know what you're talking about if you said wax on, wax off. So, but I think it has to build that into the story to make you believe somewhat that he's gone through some kind of journey, like an X Factor journey, to get from being this wimpy kid who's never,
Yeah.
never raised his hand in anger to somebody who can actually fight his way out of a paper bag and then go on to take on these semi pros almost in a serious tournament. So I think although it does seem to some people might think that it goes on a bit too long, that section, but I think it's crucial to the whole tenet of the film, and I also think the whole wax on wax off bit's quite very clever.
Yeah, because as we're watching it and we sit there thinking, I've washed a lot of cars in my life, so it probably means that perhaps it's hidden in me somewhere. But the whole ethos behind it, there's the muscle memory aspect of doing the various motions with the hands. There's also, and I think that's in there as well, is that work ethic that you need to do. It's very much pushing into a teenager that you have to work, you have to do something repetition, you have to really push yourself, and sanding the floor and painting the fence and painting the house. He certainly does these tasks over about a 4-day period. That must be an exhausting feat for a kid of however old, 15, 16, 22. So I'm going to sound really old here now myself and say that kids today will probably be sitting at home playing their PlayStations or whatever and wouldn't know how to do half of that. But, he really pushes it. And again, while I know we spoke very briefly on Twitter yesterday about it, the film is quite long, but it needs this period of almost that sort of extended work that Daniel has to put in, and the fact that after these grueling 4 days, he realizes that there's a reason behind it. And it's only when he kind of snaps, he kind of realizes that, Christ, why are you making me do this? Why are you doing that? And Miyagi starts pushing him. He starts putting little maneuvers in that all of a sudden you can see the penny drop in his head as to why he's doing it. His arms do the motion. They show that bit really well, where they show his sudden realization as to the fact that he's been working his bollocks off for however long. All of a sudden, there's a reason behind it, and there's a clear result as well.
Yeah, I think that goes back a little bit to what I said before about the maybe the moral of the story is actually about um, relationships of a teacher in whatever circumstance that might be, or a mentor, or a parent, even about how you teach, or how you make somebody grow in something, and how you make them learn, but also from his point of view, realizing that you don't get somewhere without the hard work. The Johnny and his pals have been in this dojo where they get to punch each other in the face or kick each other in the chest or whatever all the time. So it's an easy win. So okay, they learn something in a way there, but maybe they don't learn the value of what they're learning, and that's what this whole section is about. I think the value of what he's being taught, although he's not knowing what it is he's being taught at the time, and he thinks he's just being manipulated and used to clean and Mr. Miyagi's cars and do his house up. So maybe that's kind of what it's all about there, and then you see Daniel starts to take it very, very seriously from that point. You kind of get a sense in the film that it goes up a gear from that point on.
The reason why he does stuff, that sort of sacrifice he has to make, and the fact that it's easy, and they've done similar in numerous other films where you're learning about how to shoot well. It's not necessarily about shooting a paper target. It sounds a bit mean, but sometimes you've got to learn to shoot a moving target and things like that. And one thing, now that we've gone past the wax on, wax off stage and everything else, and it's easy to see parallels with other films, but the whole element of the master, the apprentice, the teacher pupil, it reminded me so much of Star Wars.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that, because I wrote a couple of notes down earlier, and I'd written down Star Wars, and then I'd moved next, and I think for me it's the Rocky and Mickey dynamic.
Hmm.
Although Miyagi's a lot less of a crabby character than Rocky, but yeah, the whole pupil and apprentice thing, yeah, that it definitely shines through. So yeah, at least we both got the same thoughts about
the
that?
elements, and jumping back a little bit, where Miyagi makes a point of telling Daniel that he doesn't teach karate for violence. It's so that you don't have to use it. Almost, it is about the self-defense. It's that there's the element that you shouldn't have to think about punching, because that should be the last thing you think about. Although one thing he did say when he was saying about the washing cars, and he said, "Do you want to learn karate?" And Daniel said, "Yeah, I guess so." He said, "You say yes, you say no. There is no guess so." And that was just virtually ripped straight off of Empire Strikes Back, which I think only came out of 3 or 4 years before. So it's quite interesting how that went. But at least it didn't turn out that Miyagi was Daniel's father in the end, because that would have been really weird. So while all this is happening, Daniel's courtship of Ali has moved on a step, and at this point they've had a rather awkward first date where Daniel's mum takes him to their really large, expensive house, and he meets her parents, who are really what you'd expect to be that sort of well-off, snobbish, really sort of couple who go to country clubs and stuff. And it doesn't help that his mum turns up in this really old banger of a car that they have to start. The whole dynamic, where there is a lot of sort of mention almost of the class gulf between them, where Daniel sort of lives with a single parent in an apartment block, what is presumed to be the rough side of town. And Ali's very sort of middle class with an expensive house and everything else. And all her friends drive these really flashy cars. And that's a sort of little subtext that once they seem to resolve that, it gets completely left alone, which is fair enough. But again, that's an 80s sort of trope that you get like in things like Pretty in Pink and stuff, where, you know, it is about that divide which you almost have to cross from rich and poor.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Of course, it makes you root for Daniel even more to get the pretty girl, but also the well-to-do girl, you know. And you think, go on, would it work in this country? You know, we have a class system that America claim not to have. Theirs is probably based more on money and wealth and career and stuff like that, whereas ours comes from a different place. But you know, if you're a lad like me who grew up on a council estate that lived quite next to a new posh private estate, you could see yourself in Daniel in a way, whereby, oh, there was a pretty girl who lived in a nice estate just around the corner, but you know, you're living on crispy pancakes and whatever.
Don't knock it. Don't knock it.
No, they were lovely, mind. The chicken and bacon ones were particularly good. Although they're probably banned now for whatever was the ingredients were.
It was a horse, wasn't it?
Okay, horse and bacon. I don't mind. They were tasty.
It tasted good.
So yeah, you kind of, you know, I think a lot of people would have seen themselves in that situation, or would have projected themselves into a situation like that, with Daniel and Ali in that scenario. But yeah, then they go on what was quite, I suppose, quite a cliched 1980s romantic date that would have happened in America, not in this country, when they go and play crazy golf and they go to the amusement arcades and go karts and all that kind of stuff. It's nice to see how Americans live. At least.
I think I might try that next time my wife suggests date night. I might take her down to the arcade and have a little game of Pac-Man or Time Crisis or whatever the kids are playing today. I don't know.
I can't see that being anything other than a winner.
Yeah, well, so certainly I'll be the winner anyway. But she's not very good at computer games. So once they've had their little makeup, and you know, we've had the issue at the country club where we see that Johnny and his parents are also part of this fairly well-to-do set, because Johnny is at this country club, you know, in a shirt and tie, all very prim and proper. But then he sees Daniel trying to sneak in and makes a big play of trying to kiss Ali, and that causes some of that as well. But it's after this, really, you know, we've had the sort of cliched, almost montage style training. Daniel standing on the post with the silhouette, trying to do some crane technique kicking and balance skills and things like that. Pretty soon after that, we get to the tournament eventually. This is basically a municipal sports hall with karate people of all ages, and unless they were midgets, there was certainly a younger age group tournament going on at the same time.
That's right. Yeah, Daniel's competing in the All Valley under 18s. And as you say, there are kids of various ages there by the looks of things.
So the tournament, I don't know what the qualification criteria were, other than one of the referees said you had to be a minimum brown belt, which I guess is quite good. And they just lie about it. I suppose pre 9/11, no checks. They they just blag it really and blag their way in. But the Cobra Kai dojo people, they seem to have a lot of representatives, including Steve McQueen's son.
Oh, really? Which one does he play?
Yeah, he was Dutch. A
Oh,
slightly chunky looking chap with odd hair, looked like a bit like a melted candle. But he.
that's Steve McQueen's son, really?
The weird thing is, I saw a documentary about Steve McQueen a couple of weeks ago, and all about how he donated motorbikes to raise funds for like orphanages and stuff, and his son was quite heavily involved in that, and he looked quite familiar. And of course, you stick it through Google, and yeah, it was Chad McQueen.
Wow. Now that is something I never knew.
Yeah, it was a little bit strange. He's the one I think that Daniel beats in the quarterfinals. But yeah, they seem to have a very strong representation at this tournament. It's almost like the European countries at a World Cup or something. They seem to take up most of the places.
Yeah.
Daniel obviously takes a while to get started. There are that sort of the beginner's nerves that parallel with Rocky, when Rocky realizes he stepped into the ring with Apollo Creed, and it's like, can train all you want, son, but this is a massive step up in class. Daniel has to learn that he can't just take a step back out of the ring. He's got to get on the front foot.
Yeah, exactly. He's done all that training, and then he sort of goes back in on himself, doesn't he? And yeah, you've got the Cobra Kai kind of not only is he having to fight them on the mat, but they're almost like omnipresent, aren't they? From the sidelines, browbeating him from the sidelines into submission in a way with their horrible little rat faces, and you've got to commend the casting people who put the Cobra Kai together, because I don't think I've ever seen such a collection of scum and villainy, to take another Star Wars phrase, all in one set of people who, with just the way they speak and the way they look and their sneers, it's absolutely perfectly casted. And so Daniel's got not only the fear of somebody trying to kick his teeth in, but also those guys from the side threatening that if he gets past, they're going to kick his teeth in as well. So yeah, he's got to realise that karate's not just about sanding the floor and copying Mr. Miyagi's moves out on the beach. It's actually about dodging fists and all the rest of it.
I suppose there is that nature and nurture argument, really, where we see throughout, and I know you mentioned it earlier, where the Cobra Kai are used to this dominating person who probably drinks a lot and beats his wife, stands there giving them orders. And then Mr. Miyagi is very reserved, and that sort of quiet support, that the arm around the shoulder that they certainly don't have. And the fact that by the time that Daniel's managed to get himself through to the semi-final, he's fighting Bobby, and the sensei tells him, don't try and win this match. Don't try and out karate him or whatever. And it is just like, do him, like put him out, like injure him. There's no means of competition, or there's no sport in it. It's just pure violence. It's pure inflicting pain and humiliation on him. And that's, the fact that he says, I can beat him, he's got belief in himself that's obviously been drilled into him. But the fact that the teacher tells him, go against all that, this is when we've had the real sort of turning point in that relationship.
Yeah, he's gone out of control. I think he spiraled out of control a little bit, Kreese, by this point, and any sense of sport and fair play, which he hasn't been in great evidence up to this point, has definitely evaporated by then. And it's funny, again, you mentioned about Bobby there, and he's starting to doubt his master about what he's telling him to do. But in the skeleton scene, way back in the middle of the film, where they all beat Daniel up as he's trying to leg it from them from the dance, Bobby is the one who is pleading with Johnny to tell him to ease up on Daniel as well. So, although they are a bunch of bullies and ne'er-do-wells, all that's the general consensus as you watch the Cobra Kai throughout the film. There are flickers of goodness in them, or one or two of them at different stages, and Bobby's the one that we'd already seen it from before we get to that stage where actually, when he does go and he really damages Daniel's leg in the semi-final, his first thought is to go straight to Daniel, not to the sensei and seek his approval and everything else. He goes straight to Daniel to apologize.
Yeah, and that's part of it where you see again, because when Steve McQueen's boy lost in the quarterfinal, he was very much, you could see in the sensei's face, he was persona non grata. He was, right, you are nothing to me now, fuck off. And then Bobby, who done his master's bidding and really crocked Daniels, kicked him sort of above the knee. Again, he's sort of given that look of, well, I told him to do that, aren't I great? And all, this is part of something in sport that the whole Corinthian ethos of doing things well and doing things the right way. And it's quite clear that, his ambition is for Johnny, who's his star pupil, to win the title. It doesn't matter how. He doesn't want him to beat the best or put himself in any risk, because he knows that if Daniel's out of the semi-final or he's injured, that means they win the trophy by default. And it kind of defeats the whole purpose, really, of the sport. It's the Mourinho of winning. It's not how you do it. It's just the trophy at the end of the day.
And you kind of, it also then makes you wonder about his background from his time in the Navy SEALs or the Marines or whatever he was in. You kind of wonder, what sort of dark shit did he get up to in Vietnam? You know that no Geneva Conventions were ever adhered to when he was in the military. It does make you wonder.
Yeah, and he's just got that face, and he's horrible.
Well, he is, but then do you know what is? Although I've seen this film so many times, and I know him in this character and everything else, I still can't look at him and not think about the character. The fact that he's in Cagney and Lacey, and he plays like a good guy. He's one of the cops in that, and it always conflicts me slightly to see him play in Crease when I also know him from the same time as one of the good guys from Cagney and Lacey. It's a weird thing that he's so iconic in this film and so crucial to this film and so identifiable. Yet, to me at least, he's not hammered it down as like, that's him, that's who he is, and I can't see beyond that.
Yeah, he's not completely typecast anyway.
No.
So after Daniel's been, injured in the semi-final, he's taken out by stretcher to random sort of back warehouse, and his mum's there and Ali's there, and the referees and the doctor saying, "Oh, good game, you did well." Mr. Miyagi, at some point earlier in the film, has put some very, doesn't look that much more like a warm compress on his shoulder earlier on. He's effectively been ruled out of the final. They were going to give Johnny the trophy, and Mr. Miyagi's warmed his hands and touched Daniel's leg in a way that has suddenly G'd him back up and decided to come out just as they're about to hand the trophy over. He limps out and says, "Yeah, I'll fight," setting up the big showdown after all. It's not going out in the semi-final because everyone's trying to say, "Look, you did well, you got nothing to prove." Really, he's been through all this to fight Johnny ultimately, and it'd be a pretty rubbish film if we didn't even get that.
Yeah, that'd be quite an anticlimax. It is. It's to fight Johnny. It's to prove to everybody, but it's to prove to himself as well, isn't it? That he can go through that pain barrier. He can face himself. He can face the pain. He can face any opponent. And yeah, it's quite a miracle cure that he gets off Mr. Miyagi. I don't know if you've ever tried it, but they've not given away the secret of that. And as far as I can remember, it doesn't work on a ruptured anterior cruciate ligament injury. I can assure you of that.
Yeah, I say medical science has come a long way, but you can't beat a caretaker's loving hands caressing a young boy's knee.
I think you can get arrested for that these days.
Yeah, they weren't bonsai trees; they were yew trees. But anyway, so we're at the final, and Daniel, with his very heavy limp and everything, Johnny's gone into it. You can tell he's so hyped up; he's full of it. He tears into Daniel straight away, but Daniel actually goes, I think it's first to 3 points, and he takes the first 2 points very, very calm. He deals with the I'll say sounds very scientific, but he's calm and he takes those points very efficiently. And this is when, again, the sensei sort of pops up and they have a little timeout, and he has to put that sort of whisper in his ear. It's sweep the leg.
Sweep the leg, yeah.
No mercy.
Yeah, no, well, there is no mercy in this dojo.
I say, but they're not in their dojo. They're in the Valley Leisure Centre on a Saturday afternoon.
Yeah.
Johnny takes the next 2 points, and because he has, he's put a little bit more pain on Daniel. He's gone for the leg, like the sensei says. He's put him out of his stride. He's on the cusp of the winning point. He doesn't go for the winning stroke or anything. He grabs Daniel's leg and elbows it just to sort of really put that pain on. And he has to get an official warning for the strike, and you think, well, it's 2-2, it's the first to 3. Is that really your first instinct to try and do his knee rather than just go for the win? It's I think again that's the sort of teacher coming out there.
Yeah, it is, and yeah, it's not just about beating him; it's about humiliating him and inflicting as much pain as possible. And again, that goes back to Kreese and the sadism that's running through his veins. And then, of course, we get to probably the absolute iconic moment of the entire film, don't we? With the completely undefendable maneuver. I don't know if you ever tried it in the playground, but I don't think it ever knocked me out once.
No, I think it's one of those that you can't defend it, but there's a mystical power behind it because of course there's an earlier reference to it where Miyagi's done some training of his own on the post while Daniel was learning about balance in the sea, and he's it's you can't defend it, but no, it's very you don't need to know about that. But of course, he can barely walk. He can just about stand on the one leg. They obviously don't teach that at the dojo because otherwise, surely Kreese would have intimated to his boys saying, if he starts standing on one leg with his arms in the air, and I think now if it were you or I at the pub on a Saturday night and someone came up to us, stood in front and started doing that, I think we'd know what was going to happen. Well, it could be one of two things. He'd try and kick us or he'd fall flat on his ass. But of course, this is it, isn't it? This is Daniel executes the kick that you can't defend, and he wins the title after 2 months of training against lifetime students of karate. I sound really cynical there.
No, but that's what you're at. I think you're talking the fairy tale of the 1980s American movie. It would be absolute non-seller if it went exactly as you would imagine. It would just be another one of these stories whereby, teenage boy moves from one side of the country to the other, isn't very popular, gets in with the wrong crowd, gets beaten up, tries to get revenge in a karate tournament, loses, and then takes a gun to school the next day and shoots 12 people. That's probably more realistic.
Yeah, I say it's not really escapism then.
No.
Is it? I don't think people would be talking about. Well, they might be talking about it 30 years later, but not for the reasons we are. But yeah, and it's just that sort of ending, isn't it? Where it's the happy, won the title. He's done what he set out to do, and as you said earlier, sort of Johnny in his. This is obviously the first, which we may see later on in the TV show, the first time that he shows that redemption, where he grabs the trophy from the organizer and gives it to Daniel, saying, "Oh, you're the best. You're great." The sensei's probably going to kick 7 shades of whatever out of him when they get back. But yeah, this is it. This is there isn't too much guff at the end. It finishes like a Rocky film, just on Miyagi smiling.
Yeah, that's it. The guy, obviously, it is the guy who makes Rocky, and this is one of the most striking echoes of the Rocky films. I think Rocky 1, which I've not seen for donkey's years, actually, I'm pretty sure it finishes almost exactly the same way, doesn't it? Whereby he gets the belt in the ring, shouts Adrian a few times, and it kind of ends there. Does it really go anywhere after that?
Well, the first one he loses, doesn't he? And then the second one he wins, but she's watching it on telly. So I lose. Oh, they're all the same.
Yeah. Well, there's and again another Rocky thing. Just talking about the end there, the famous song "You're the Best." It was one of 2 or 3 that was penciled in to be in Rocky 3. With Survivor, obviously, Eye of the Tiger, which was the one that was actually chosen in the end, and a couple of others, I think, or at least one other. So it's interesting that it was kept over for another year or so, and they used it in Karate Kid, which Survivor also happened to be on the soundtrack of Karate Kid.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of links going on, and obviously there's some Star Wars undertones in there as well. So if you picked it apart, there's probably very little that's original in this film, but they've done it in such a way that I
Yeah.
think there's lots and lots of moments that survive into the popular culture, even now, 33 years on, or 34 years on,
God.
sorry, since its
Oh, God.
release.
Yeah, and that's the thing is it does borrow. It's not very. It is quite shameless. It borrows a lot from other films, from other industries, and that. But that's the thing is that, like we touched on earlier, they tried a remake of it. What 4 or 5 years ago, and I don't know how much money it made, but they haven't come back to that. They haven't gone the new Karate Kid 2 or whatever,
Mm.
because this is perhaps one of the best examples of. Yes, it's not a fine example of storytelling that will go through the ages. Like you said earlier, it's not the Shawshank Redemption or the Godfather, but it's one of those films that you watch, you remember, you feel good, you watch it, and you do. Most people want Daniel to win at the end of the day, except the geezer from How I Met Your Mother,
Mm.
who wanted Johnny to win and saw him as the victim. But it's very much an absolute classic of what it does. It's perfect. Even when I turned the film on yesterday, I got off iTunes for cheap, and it said 2 hours 7 minutes. I was like, what the? But but yeah, you could trim it down and everything, but it doesn't feel overblown in the way that a lot of films do.
Mm.
Some films you sit there for 2 hours 7 minutes and it feels like 2 weeks.
Well, I just watched. I recorded The Great Gatsby over Christmas. I watched it
Mm,
yesterday night with my wife, and I went to the pictures to see that. And I remember thinking that was about 3.5 hours long, but it's only about 6 minutes longer than Karate Kid, and to me
mm,
that it's of course two totally different stories. And these days, I think you can get away with longer films because you can make them look
yeah.
better, even if the story's lacking a bit. But yeah, to me, Great Gatsby felt a lot more bloated than the Karate Kid did. I think the Karate Kid kind of you got past each point as it was needed to be covered. Whereas I think there's a lot of films that are of the same length, even sometimes shorter, where you think, well, that bit was completely unnecessary. But I don't think you find that in this film in particular. But also, I think most '80s films there was no messing about. I think they got through their story very quickly. A lot of them didn't have much of a story, mind you, but I think the other thing about a lot of films that when you pick them out and they're from your childhood, of course, it's nostalgia, isn't it? It's not just about the film; it's about a feeling it gives you. You're remembering watching that film, eating your wagon wheel and drinking your Tizer with your with your
Uh,
sim- with your siblings or whatever, and think about. I think another point of it is that Karate Kid was probably one of them films. It was one of the early video shop classics where everybody was starting to get a video recorder
yeah.
around about that time. And video shops were starting to get more and more popular. So you'd be going in there every weekend. And I think that's another reason why it's probably so popular because we would have watched these films over and over again because you hired them out for a weekend or whatever. So you really watched them time and time again. There wasn't that much choice. There wasn't Netflix. There wasn't Sky
Mm.
Movies. There wasn't etc. There wasn't the internet. So you kind of they're as much a part of your childhood as going around your nan's house for tea or schoolyard football games and everything else. And so I think that as much as the quality or lack of in the films, you can see why people get connected to so many things from things like this. I mean, as I mentioned before, this is my favorite film, and I'll even okay, I'm probably stretching it a bit to say it's the greatest film of all time, but I don't think I'm ever going to see anything that's going to mean so much to me as the Karate Kid does.
No, and this is it. It's a part of the. I've said this pretty much every episode so far. Part of the reason why I've done the podcast is it's partly to rewatch these films that you can't replace that awe and wonder of the first time you saw this or Star Wars or something like that. But sitting down, watching it from start to finish, a lot of the times, we have the film channels and Netflix and stuff, and you might flick through and see, you might catch 20 minutes of Back to the Future or something else. But to actually sit down and watch this film from start to finish, it's the first time I'd done it since I was probably a kid or a teenager, and you think this, you can see why you enjoyed it.
Mm.
Yeah, it's you can tear it up and say it's similar to this, or it's ripped off of that, or this, that, and the other, and a little bit of Hollywood by numbers, but ultimately you remember it fondly for a reason. It's not because it's crap. It's not because you went on a date with the hottest girl in school to watch it or something like that. It's because you watched it over and over again, and it was great fun.
I think you said something there that actually struck home as well. Is that again thinking about those days when you used to hire a film when it was brand new and you used to get it from the video shop. You would sit down and you would sit down as a family to watch it. So it kind of became an event in your own household
Mm.
to do that. Whereas nowadays, I imagine that most people are consuming their films at home, either in their bedroom, or, they're on their own, they're watching it on the laptop, or they might have it on a date night. But it's not. I reckon very few of these things now, and I don't do it, so I could be wrong. But I reckon a lot of people don't all gather their family around together to watch a film they've just bought or rented through the internet or off Sky or whatever. So I think that's another added thing to it, whereby if you were watching Johnny and Daniel going for it, it was something that you and your sister would, be punching each other on the sofa at the same time as the film was going on. Your dad would be saying, "Oh, it's just crap this," and your mum would be, going out to the kitchen to make a cup of tea and bring the M&Ms through in a bowl, kind of thing. I'd be surprised if that's how people watch films anymore. So that
Yeah.
gives it an extra, an extra tick in the box, if you like.
Oh, it's funny. Like when I think my cousin got a camcorder in the early '90s, and me and him and my brother all tried to set one up for You've Been Framed of us doing karate and that, and it was all trying to choreograph it in his hallway. And I don't know how he managed it. I think he did a bit of judo or something. But at one point, he proper caught my brother square in the face with a kick unintentionally. And again, we just laughed because we thought this is, we wouldn't sit there watching, we were probably just about too young to watch old Bruce Lee films or even the Jackie Chan stuff, which we didn't start watching until the '90s, and our local video shop started getting them in.
Mm.
But because we'd been watching this and thought, yeah, we're gonna have some of that. Come on, let's get a camcorder
Yeah,
going.
it's entry level martial arts, isn't it?
It is, but we remember it fondly. Right, so on that bombshell, we'll pause this tape here and we'll rewind it and make sure it gets back to the video shop so they don't charge us any late fees like those scamps do. So, Mark, you run the football site, the Football
Yeah.
Pink, which is thefootballpink.net. What can people find over there?
Well, we we do a bit of an eclectic mix, really. So you can find a lot of sort of nostalgia pieces, written about historic football history things. We've got a series about the 78-79 season going on all year this year, because all the fixtures run on exactly the same date as they did in the 78-79 series. But we do a lot of opinion pieces. We do some quirky things going on. We do occasional web series of different topics. So it's all sorts you'll find on there. Some of it will be right up your street. Some of it not so much. But yeah, we're taking along nicely. Nice little independent website and blog. And we do a quarterly fanzine as well, which is very much along the same lines, although often we run a theme. Yeah, it's going well.
Well, brilliant, because as I say, there's a lot of budding writers out there, and some of whom might listen to this. And I mean, I did something for the site was about 3 or 4 years ago now, and it's just, and that, I mean, even that was obscure about some Finnish fourth division team who had a funny name.
That's
I think
right.
it was
Sexy.
And yeah, sexy boxers. And again, you've touched on the nostalgia thing, and football's another one that we look back on, and we had 6 football matches a year on the telly. So then we had to rent videos, and that it was all part of that. We'll share some of the links on the site and on Twitter, and hopefully a few new faces will find their way to your site, and I hope you'll come back and join us again in the future, and we'll see if we can find another couple of films to plough our memory banks with.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks very much.
Lovely. Well, as per usual, I'll play this out with the number one song in the UK, which was at the time of the release of this, which was August 1984, Careless Whisper. So you've done well this time. Until next time, thank you very much.